Welcome to the History Maps podcast.
Yes, hello.
So we are undertaking a very comprehensive, detailed examination of the Spartan Army today, which is part of our military history series.
Right.
And the mission for this deep dive is to look way beyond the Spartan mirage.
That mirage built up by ancient historians and commentators, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are stripping away the myths to understand the exact social, economic, and tactical machinery that created what was arguably the most formidable infantry force in ancient Greece.
And, well, what ultimately caused its catastrophic collapse.
Right, because it did collapse.
Yeah.
So we will take you through the entire life cycle of a Spartan soldier.
The anatomy of their weapons, the rigid structure of their society, all of it.
Yeah, and the precise battlefield tactics that secured their dominance. Because, I mean, when we talk about Sparta, the immediate image is usually a society obsessed with war for the sheer sake of war.
Right, a city of relentless warmongers.
Exactly, but I want to know, was there a specific practical reason they turned their entire civilization into a military barracks?
Well, the Spartan military system didn't just materialize out of some cultural love for violence.
Okay.
It was a calculated, necessary response to a massive geographical conquest.
A conquest they initiated.
Right. To understand the Spartan war machine, you really have to look back to the 8th and 7th centuries BCE.
During the First and Second Mycenaean Wars.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Sparta is located in the rugged region of Laconia.
Down in the southern Peloponnese.
Right. And they expanded their territory by marching west over the Taygetus Mountains and conquering the neighboring region of Messenia.
Now, if we look at the geography of the Peloponnese, Messenia is a vast, incredibly fertile agricultural plain.
It is.
So taking that much territory would fundamentally alter the economy of whoever controlled it.
Oh, it altered everything.
Yeah.
Because the Spartans didn't just annex the territory, they subjugated the entire native population of Messenia.
Along with portions of their own home region of Laconia, right?
Yeah. They transformed these conquered peoples into state-owned serfs.
The Helots.
The helots, yes. These helots were legally tied to specific plots of land.
Which were called kleroi.
Right, kleroi. The Spartan state then assigned these plots, along with the helots living on them, to individual Spartan citizens.
The Spartiates. So if the Spartiates hold the deed to the land, and the helots are bound to it, what does the daily economic reality look like for a Spartan citizen?
I mean, it meant total liberation from the necessities of survival.
Really?
Yeah. The agricultural labor of the helots provided a fixed mandatory tribute of food and resources directly to the Spartiate who held that kleros.
So the Spartiate doesn't farm at all?
Not at all. The helots kept a portion to survive, and the rest sustained the Spartan master.
That economic arrangement completely freed the male Spartiates from any manual labor or farming or trade.
It gave them the rarest commodity in the ancient world, which is time.
Time that was entirely devoted to forming a professional standing army.
Right, because if you look at the broader Greek world, armies were part-time citizen militias.
Composed of farmers.
Right, farmers who had to rush home to harvest their crops, but the Spartans never had to put down their spears to pick up a plow.
That structural advantage seems unparalleled. But it introduces a massive demographic liability.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, if you annex an entire neighboring nation and enslave its population, the numbers are going to be heavily skewed against you.
The demographic imbalance was profound.
What are we talking about here?
Well, modern estimates, relying on accounts from historians like Herodotus, suggest that the Helot population outnumbered the Spartiates by roughly 7 to 1.
7 to 1. So think about the math here for a second.
It's daunting.
If you are living in a society where the people you have subjugated outnumber you 7 to 1, the entire dynamic of your civilization must be dictated by the threat of an uprising.
Yes.
Does that mean the Spartan army was, at its core, an internal police force rather than an expeditionary military?
Honestly, that is the most accurate lens through which to view them. Yeah, the primary function of the early Spartan military was not to conquer the known world, but to suppress the helots within their own borders.
Because their entire foreign policy was crippled by this internal fear.
Exactly. Conducting long campaigns meant marching the army away from the city.
Leaving their homes and families completely vulnerable to a mass revolt.
Right.
It sounds like living on top of a human volcano that could erupt the moment you look away.
That's a good way to put it.
How does a government legally and psychologically manage a captive population of that size?
Well, the tension dictated every facet of their legal and cultural framework.
They needed to establish terror.
A constant atmosphere of terror. Every single year, upon taking office, the Spartan magistrates, yes, the ephors, they would formally and ritualistically declare war on the helot population.
Wait, declaring war on a population that already lives within your borders,
Yes,
who farms your land and has no formal army of its own?
correct.
What is the legal mechanism behind that?
It was a mechanism to bypass religious law, basically. Okay. In ancient Greek culture, committing homicide incurred miasma.
Which is a profound religious pollution.
Right. It required purification, and it invited the wrath of the gods.
So by formally declaring war on the helots, the ephors provided legal and religious sanction for any Spartan to murder a helot without incurring miasma.
Exactly. It was a psychological tool of terror, and it was executed largely through an institution called the crypteia.
Let's examine the crypteia, because if the main army is focused on heavy infantry tactics, how did this internal suppression operate?
The crypteia was a secretive rite.
Okay.
Select young Spartiates, usually those who had shown exceptional promise in their training, were sent out into the Laconian and Messenian countryside.
With what? Like standard gear?
No, with nothing but a dagger and minimal rations.
Just a dagger?
Just a dagger. And they were ordered to stay hidden during the day.
And at night?
At night, they emerged to patrol the roads and the fields.
Tasked with assassinating helots.
Yes, explicitly tasked with assassinating any helot who appeared too strong, too intelligent, capable of leadership, or who simply showed a spark of defiance.
So before a Spartan hoplite ever faced an Athenian or an Argide in open battle, their first formative combat experience was essentially state-sponsored assassination in the dead of night.
Yeah, the system demanded that they view the helots as a perpetual existential enemy.
It's the foundation of their military supremacy.
Right. The very reason they could afford to train all day was built entirely upon this bedrock of internal terror and strict economic exploitation.
That level of internal terror requires a very specific type of citizen to maintain it, I'd imagine.
Absolute conformity.
Right. Unwavering loyalty to the state. So let's look at the agoge.
The compulsory state-directed education regimen.
Yeah. The sources indicate this conditioning began practically at the moment of birth.
It did. The state asserted its authority immediately.
So when a Spartan infant was born, it was not solely the property or the responsibility of the parents.
No, the father was required to bring the newborn to a place called the Lesh.
To be inspected.
Yes, by the Gerousia, the Council of Elders. They examined the child for physical hardiness.
And if the elders deemed the infant too weak, or deformed, or sickly,
the child was taken to a chasm near Mount Tagessus and left exposed to the elements.
the society refused to expend communal resources on a life that could not eventually contribute to the military apparatus.
Exactly.
So, assuming a boy passes that initial inspection, he stays with his mother for his early childhood.
Right, but only until age 7.
At age 7, the family unit is deliberately fractured.
Boys were removed from their households to begin the agoge.
And this wasn't optional.
Not at all. It was an absolute prerequisite for gaining Spartiate, or full citizen status.
So how is the agoge structured?
It was divided into 3 distinct age brackets.
Okay.
From ages 7 to 12, the boys were known as the paids.
Paids.
Then from 12 to 20, they became paidoskoi. And finally, from 20 to 30, they were classified as the habants.
The accounts of the living conditions for the paids, the youngest group, describe a system designed to strip away every conceivable comfort.
Oh, the physical environment was deliberately hostile.
What were they eating?
Meager communal diets. They subsisted heavily on things like barley bread and the infamous black broth.
The soup made of boiled pork, salt, vinegar, and blood.
That's the one. The diet was specifically calibrated to promote lean, hard physiques.
And to constantly keep the boys on the edge of genuine hunger.
Exactly. And the clothing, by the time they turned 12, they were issued only a single cloak to wear for the entire year.
A single cloak. So they had to endure the freezing Peloponnesian winters and the blistering summers without changing their garments.
Yeah, and they were mostly barefoot, sleeping on reed mats they had to pull from the riverbed with their bare hands.
We often picture the agoge as a constant weapons drill. You know, boys swinging heavy wooden swords at each other from dawn until dusk.
That's a common misconception, actually.
But the historical sources suggest the early years were not focused on complex combat training at all.
Right. The primary objective of the early agoge was not martial technique, but physical and psychological hardening.
So what did they do all day?
The curriculum focused heavily on athletics, hunting, developing an extreme tolerance for pain, and rhythmic dancing.
Dancing.
Yes, the dancing was not for leisure. It was crucial for developing the precise footwork and coordination necessary for marching in a tight phalanx formation.
That makes sense. Did they learn to read and write?
They did, but strictly for practical military utility, such as reading dispatches or basic maps.
The overriding emphasis was placed on resourcefulness, stealth, and unquestioning obedience.
Exactly.
Going back to the food, if the boys were kept constantly hungry, survival would require finding food outside the official rations.
The instructors intentionally underfed the boys to force them to steal from the surrounding farms and markets.
It was a calculated exercise.
Yes, they were encouraged to steal to supplement their diet, teaching them stealth and foraging skills essential for a soldier on campaign.
But the sources also mention severe beatings if they were caught stealing.
They were not punished for the moral transgression of theft.
Oh!
No, they were punished for the incompetence of being caught.
The philosopher Plutarch recorded a famous vignette that perfectly encapsulates the extreme premium placed on avoiding public shame.
Ah, the fox.
Yes, the fox. So as the account goes, a young Spartan boy in the agoge had successfully stolen a young live fox.
Right.
And before he could return to his barracks, he was stopped by a group of adult Spartiates.
So to hide the theft, he concealed the struggling fox under his single cloak.
Exactly. And as the adults stood there conversing with him, the terrified animal began to claw and bite frantically at the boy's stomach.
But rather than cry out,
Right. Rather than reveal the stolen animal and face the agonizing shame of being caught in a failure, the boy stood perfectly still.
he maintained his composure and allowed the fox to fatally wound him.
Now, whether that specific event is a literal historical fact or a cultural parable taught to Spartan youth, it demonstrates the psychological baseline of their society.
Absolutely. Physical agony was entirely secondary to maintaining the facade of discipline.
The fear of public disgrace was instilled as a more powerful motivator than the instinct for self-preservation.
That physical pain tolerance was not just a byproduct of their lifestyle, it was formally tested in religious rituals.
Like the ritual at the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia.
Yes, exactly. There was a rite where cheese was placed upon the altar.
And the paidiskoi, the teenage boys, were tasked with fighting their way through to steal it.
But the altar was defended by older youths armed with whips.
So the younger boys were subjected to brutal, ritualized beatings as they attempted to reach the altar.
And they were judged on their ability to endure the lashes without shedding a tear or making a sound.
It served simultaneously as a physical trial, a religious initiation rite, and a public demonstration of their stoicism to the entire city.
So, as these boys age into the paidiskoi, and eventually the habantes, the socialization process shifts.
They are moved from the youthful packs, called agoge, into the adult communal messes, the syssitia.
Right. The transition into adult military society was a carefully engineered process.
And institutional mentorship played a massive role here.
It did, frequently taking the form of pederastic relationships between an older, established Spartiate and a younger trainee.
This older mentor, the Erastes.
Yes, the Erastes acted as a guide, a sponsor, and a model of martial virtue.
He was responsible for integrating the youth into the military brotherhood and ensuring he adopted the correct behavioral norms.
Because the ultimate objective for every Spartan male was to secure acceptance into a secession by unanimous vote of its members.
These were the common messes where adult Spartiates of all ages gathered to eat their evening meals together every single day of their lives.
Every single day.
Graduation from the agoge finally arrives at age 30.
Yes.
At that point, a Spartan man gains full citizenship,
The right to vote in the assembly.
the right to live at home with his wife instead of in the barracks.
And he receives his state-allotted kleros of land and the helots to work it.
If you look at this entire pipeline, from the elder council inspection to the daily mess halls, it seems less like a military academy teaching tactical doctrine and more like a psychological conditioning program designed to systematically erase individuality.
Well, erasing individuality was the core function of the system.
Because in the mechanics of a hoplite phalanx, individual heroism or a desire to stand out is a catastrophic liability.
The state required absolute, unbreakable unit cohesion.
Right.
By raising the boys communally from age 7, subjecting them to the exact same deprivations, stripping away their familial ties, and making their physical survival dependent on the group.
The agoge replaced loyalty to the biological family with an unquestioning fanatical obedience to the state and to the men standing next to them in the shield wall.
Exactly.
That cohesion is visually striking when we look at the panoply, the weapons and armor of the fully trained Spartiae.
It was. By the 5th century BCE, they had cultivated a very specific uniform appearance designed to project menace across a battlefield.
The visual impact of the Spartan hoplite was engineered to be a weapon of psychological warfare before a single spear was thrown.
They famously wore the iconic red cloak, the phalanx.
Dyed with madder root.
Right. The crimson color was chosen partially because it masked the sight of their own blood, denying the enemy the satisfaction of seeing them wounded.
And more importantly, when deployed en masse, it presented a uniform, intimidating wall of blood-red color advancing across the field.
Yes. Additionally, adult Spartiates were noted for elaborately grooming their long hair before a battle.
Now, why the long hair? In most military cultures, hair is kept short for practical reasons in close combat.
In Sparta, long, well-groomed hair was a symbol of their free, privileged status.
Because manual laborers and helots were required to keep their hair shorn.
Exactly. Taking the time to braid and oil their hair right before a battle demonstrated a terrifying calm.
It signaled to the enemy that the Spartans were entirely unbothered by the impending violence.
Let's break down the physical equipment that made this violence so effective.
The anchor of the entire system is the shield.
The aspis, sometimes referred to as the hoplon.
Right. The aspis dictated the entire style of Greek warfare.
It was a massive, concave piece of equipment, typically measuring 90 to 100 centimeters in diameter.
And the construction was highly sophisticated.
It featured a thick wooden core, often fashioned from poplar or willow, for a balance of flexibility and strength.
And this wooden bowl was then faced with a thin, continuous sheet of bronze,
which made it incredibly heavy.
weighing anywhere from 6 to 8 kilograms.
So if you are standing on a dusty plain in the middle of summer, holding an 8-kilogram weight on your arm for hours of marching, maneuvering, and fighting, the physical toll must be immense.
How did the human arm actually wield a shield of that diameter and weight effectively?
It was only possible due to a highly specific two-point grip system.
Okay, tell me about the grip.
In the exact center of the shield's concave interior was the porpax, a wide bronze armband,
The hoplite slid his left arm through this band right up to the elbow.
allowing the forearm to bear the weight.
Right.
Then, near the rightward rim of the shield's interior, his left hand gripped the antilabe, which was usually a stout leather thong or cord.
So by sliding the arm through the center and gripping the edge, the way the shield sits across the body fundamentally changes.
Right.
It's not held out in front of the chest like a smaller buckler.
Precisely the opposite. Because the left arm is anchored in the center of the 3-foot diameter shield, half of the shield extends out past the hoplite's left side.
Meaning the shield effectively covered the warrior's own left side from neck to thigh.
However, the right half of the shield projected outward into open space, offering vital protection to the unshielded right side of the man standing to his immediate left in the formation.
That structural reality forces mandatory cooperation. You cannot fight effectively alone with an aspis.
If you break formation, your right side is completely exposed.
The equipment inextricably linked the survival of the individual to the stability of the group.
And the shield also served as a canvas for state identity.
Right, the paint.
Most famously, Spartan shields bore the painted lambda symbol, a large inverted V standing for Lacedaemon.
The broader geographic and political name for the Spartan state.
Exactly.
The cultural weight of the shield is perfectly captured in the traditional Spartan mother's farewell,
Either with this or on this.
as she hands her son his heavy bronze shield before a campaign, meaning you either return victorious carrying your shield or you return dead, being carried upon it as a makeshift stretcher.
Because the ultimate shame in Spartan society was dropping that heavy shield in order to run faster away from a battle.
An act that branded you a ripsaspides, a shield dropper.
Moving to their offensive weapons, the primary tool of the hoplite was the dory.
The heavy thrusting spear.
Right. It was constructed from ash wood, which was favored across the ancient world for its dense grain and high flexibility,
preventing it from shattering easily on impact.
The dory measured between 2 and 3.5 meters long.
It featured a heavy iron, leaf-shaped head designed to penetrate layered armor.
And a bronze butt spike on the opposite end called a sarder, which translates roughly to lizard killer.
Now, the iron head makes sense for the primary thrust, but what was the tactical utility of the bronze butt spike?
It served a dual purpose on the field. Practically, it allowed the heavy spear to be planted upright in the soil during a halt.
keeping it ready to hand.
More importantly, in the intense crush of a phalanx battle, if the primary iron spearhead snapped off against an enemy shield, which happened frequently, the hoplite could quickly reverse the shaft and thrust with the bronze sartor.
And as the front ranks pushed forward and trampled over fallen enemies, the rear ranks could use the downward-facing butt spike to deliver finishing strikes to the wounded beneath their feet.
The efficiency is brutal, but eventually, in prolonged combat, a spear will splinter completely.
When the dory broke, they drew their secondary weapon, the xiphos. Now, if we look at the standard Greek xiphos used by Athens or Argos, it was a straight-bladed sword around 60 centimeters long.
But the Spartan sword was notably different.
It was exceptionally short, only 30 to 45 centimeters.
Yes.
If every other Greek city-state is fielding men with 60-centimeter swords, why on earth would the Spartans intentionally equip themselves with a blade half that size? Doesn't that put them in an immediate, fatal reach disadvantage?
If combat consisted of one-on-one duels on an open field, a shorter blade would be a severe disadvantage.
But they aren't fighting duels.
No, they were fighting within the crushing, claustrophobic press of a phalanx.
When two heavily armored phalanx formations collide, the distance between opposing warriors is reduced to mere inches.
You have men pushing from behind, shields locking in the front. In that suffocating crush of bronze, wood, and flesh, a long blade is completely useless.
You simply do not have the physical space to draw a longsword back, let alone swing it with any force.
Because the mechanics of the crush prevent slashing, a shorter blade actually becomes a lethal asset.
The Spartan xiphos was effectively a heavy dirk, designed strictly for extreme close-quarter stabbing.
They were trained to hold it close to the body and thrust it upward into the narrow gaps in the enemy's shield wall,
specifically targeting the exposed groin, the armpits, and the throat above the cuirass.
There is a famous historical anecdote where an Athenian mocked a Spartan, asking why their swords were so ridiculously short.
And the Spartan replied, "So that we may get close to the enemy."
Exactly.
If you are wielding a blade that short, requiring you to get within inches of an armed opponent, you must be taking a massive amount of physical punishment.
You are.
How did they survive getting that close? Let's look at the armor.
In the Archaic period, they utilized heavy bronze muscle cuirasses.
Breastplates sculpted to mimic the idealized human torso.
Right. These offered substantial protection but were exceedingly heavy and retained body heat, exhausting the wearer.
But by the classical period, many Spartans and other Greeks transitioned to the lenothorax.
This was a composite armor made of tightly layered linen, or felt, that was glued together with rigid animal resins.
Linen sounds flimsy compared to solid bronze.
It was deceptively strong. The laminated layers of glued linen acted almost like ancient Kevlar, providing excellent protection against slashing swords and arrows.
And crucially, it was significantly lighter and more flexible than solid bronze,
allowing for greater endurance during long summer campaigns.
Below the waist, they wore bronze greaves molded to the calves to protect their lower legs, which were exposed beneath the bottom rim of the shield.
And crowning the panoply is the helmet, the famous Corinthian helmet.
Visually striking, but functionally, it seems like a nightmare to wear.
The bronze Corinthian helmet offered comprehensive, unmatched physical protection.
It was forged from a single sheet of bronze and enclosed the entire head, cheeks, and face,
leaving only narrow slits for the eyes and a small vertical opening for the mouth to breathe.
The protective benefit against a downward spear thrust was immense, but it came at a severe physiological cost.
It heavily restricted peripheral vision, plunging the wearer into a state of tunnel vision.
Furthermore, the thick bronze completely muffled hearing.
So if you are wearing a helmet that makes you practically deaf and eliminates your peripheral vision while standing in a screaming crowd of thousands of men, how do you maneuver an army?
The sensory deprivation must require an entirely different system of command.
That sensory isolation is exactly why the Spartans required a highly organized, deeply structured command hierarchy.
Other Greek city-states essentially fielded citizen militias.
Farmers and merchants grouped by their tribes, they fought bravely, but they operated as large, somewhat unwieldy blocks of men.
Sparta set itself apart with a strict modular hierarchy that allowed for precise, localized control even when the men couldn't hear their general.
Let's break down the anatomy of that command structure. What are the specific subdivisions of the Spartan army?
The foundational building block of the phalanx was the enomotia, which translates to a sworn band,
This was a squad of roughly 32 to 36 men.
commanded by a veteran officer called an anomatarch,
2 to 4 of these squads were combined to form a Pentecostes.
consisting of 72 to 128 men under a pentaconter.
These were then grouped into a locos, a company of 144 to 640 men commanded by a locos.
Finally, the largest distinct tactical unit was the mora, a regiment of 500 to 1,000 men commanded by a polemarch.
It is an army built of interlocking parts, operating on a chain of command that trickles all the way down to a 30-man squad.
If they can't rely on shouted verbal commands over the din of battle, how did they actually maintain order and direct these units on the march?
They relied on music and rhythm. The Spartans famously marched into battle to the music of flute players embedded within the ranks.
This was not meant for entertainment or to raise morale.
No, it was a rhythmic metronome that kept the entire massive formation perfectly in step.
They marched at a deliberate, slow, and measured pace.
While other Greek armies often broke into a disorganized, screaming run for the final 100 yards of a charge to overcome their terror, the Spartans advanced in absolute silence or while singing a rhythmic paean.
Moving as a single, terrifying wall of bronze.
The drill they used to maneuver this wall was surprisingly straightforward.
The historian Xenophon, who fought alongside the Spartans, described the core tactical rule as simply, follow the man in front of you.
That single ingrained directive allowed these subunits to execute complex maneuvers that entirely baffled other Greek armies.
If a threat appeared on the flank, the polemarch didn't need to shout orders to 1,000 deafened men.
He signaled the officers, and by simply following the precise footwork of the man ahead of them, an Moshe could fluidly wheel to face the new threat.
Or countermarch to reverse their facing entirely, without the formation falling into a chaotic mob.
Once that silent, methodical formation actually clashes with the enemy line, how does the combat unfold physically? There is a lot of debate among historians about the concept of othismos.
Othismos literally translates to pushing or shoving.
The historical debate centers on the exact mechanics of the clash.
Was othismos a literal physical rugby scrum, where the ranks in the back of the phalanx put their shoulders into the backs of the men in front of them, physically bulldozing the enemy line?
Or was othismos a metaphor for the relentless forward pressure of a formation continuously stepping into the fight and thrusting with their spears?
Consider the physical realities of the equipment. If you have 8 rows of heavily armored men physically shoving the man in front of them, wouldn't that immense pressure just crush the lungs of your own front row against the backs of their shields before they even reach the enemy?
That is the argument favored by many modern military historians. The physics of a literal continuous mass shove are highly problematic for the survival of the front rank.
It is more likely that the physical pushing occurred locally and sporadically when shields locked.
The primary mechanism of combat in a formation standing 8 to 12 ranks deep was the synchronized, relentless, overarm thrusting of thousands of spears.
The rear ranks provided psychological backing and a physical mass that prevent the front ranks from stepping back or fleeing.
Keeping the forward pressure relentless.
We should also discuss the very top of this military hierarchy, the Spartan kings.
Unlike almost any other Greek state, Sparta had a dual kingship. 2 kings from 2 distinct royal families ruling simultaneously.
Yes, the Agiad and Eurypontid houses. This was a system designed to prevent absolute tyranny by one individual.
In a military context, the dual kingship functioned as a strategic failsafe.
Usually, one king led the army in the field on campaign, while the other king remained in Sparta to manage domestic affairs.
Oversee the suppression of the helots and ensure continuity of government if the campaigning king was killed in action.
And the king commanding the army didn't just stand in the back directing traffic. He fought in the front rank, surrounded by his personal guard, the hippes.
The hippes were the absolute elite of the Spartan military machine.
They were 300 hand-picked royal bodyguards, chosen for their physical prowess and their impeccable conduct in the agoge.
The name translates to knights or horsemen, a relic of an earlier era. But in the classical period, they fought strictly on foot as heavy infantry shock troops.
These were the exact 300 men who famously deployed with King Leonidas the first at the Pass of Thermopylae in 480 BCE.
In a standard battle line, the king and the hippes were positioned on the extreme right wing of the phalanx,
Which was considered the position of greatest honor, prestige, and danger.
If we summarize this vast machinery, you can compare the Spartan phalanx to a complex biological organism.
Every cell, every individual hoplite knows its exact limited function.
They are physically bound together by the overlapping shields, reacting to the subtle signals of the officers, wheeling and marching with a fluid synchronicity that contrasted sharply with the chaotic, adrenaline-fueled charges of their rivals.
But while the enduring historical images of the pure Spartiate hoplite and the red cloak standing alone against the world, the reality is they rarely fought alone.
We need to look at the unsung ranks that made their campaigns possible.
The periokoi, the helots, and the specialized light infantry.
This is a vital layer to add to our understanding of Spartan logistics. The Spartiates were always a demographic minority within their own army.
Any large-scale campaign required massive auxiliary support. We must start with the periokoi, a term which translates to the dwellers around.
These were free, non-citizen residents who lived in the smaller towns and coastal villages scattered throughout Laconia and Messenia.
If they are free men but not citizens, what is their function in this highly stratified society? Why wouldn't they rebel alongside the helots?
Economically, the periokoi were the indispensable engine of the Spartan state.
The Spartiates were forbidden from engaging in trade or manual labor.
Therefore, the periokoi were the craftsmen, the merchants, the shipbuilders, and the blacksmiths who actually manufactured the bronze shields, forged the iron spearheads, and processed the matter dye for the red cloaks.
They didn't rebel because they generally shared in the economic prosperity and security provided by Spartan hegemony, and they enjoyed a degree of local autonomy.
Militarily, they were obligated to serve as auxiliary hoplites.
Initially, they fought in their own separate contingents on the flanks.
But by the late 5th century BCE, as the number of full Spartiates began to fall precipitously, the periokoi were heavily integrated directly into the Spartan moray.
Standing shoulder to shoulder with Spartiates to pad out the thinning ranks of heavy infantry.
And then there is the most complex demographic on the battlefield, the helots.
We established earlier that the entire foundation of the Spartan state was built on the constant, paranoid terror of a helot rebellion.
So the idea of a Spartan general handing a weapon to a helot seems incredibly counterintuitive.
It is the ultimate, inescapable irony of Spartan history. Despite their profound terror of a mass helot uprising, the logistical demands of a long-range military campaign required them to utilize helot labor.
The Spartiates could not carry all their own supplies.
Each Spartiate hoplite was typically accompanied on campaign by at least 1, and sometimes up to 7, helot attendants.
These men acted as baggage handlers, foragers, and valets, carrying the heavy armor on the long marches so the Spartiate would be fresh for battle.
But the helots didn't just carry the baggage train, they were actively deployed into combat zones.
They were heavily utilized in specialized roles. Helots frequently served as psiloi, which are light-armed skirmishers.
They fought without armor, using slings to throw stones, or throwing light javelins to harass the enemy before the main phalanx clash.
Later, when Sparta attempted to build a navy to challenge Athens, helots provided the massive, grueling manpower required to row the triremes.
And in times of severe crisis, the state took an even more radical step. They actually armored the helots and put them in the phalanx.
When manpower shortages became critical during the Peloponnesian War, the Spartan state took the immense psychological risk of arming helots as heavy infantry hoplites.
These men were designated as neodemotes, meaning newly enfranchised.
They were promised freedom from their serfdom and a grant of land in exchange for rigorous military service on distant campaigns.
That is a specific detail. It proves that social mobility did exist in Sparta, even if it was mobility born entirely out of military desperation and demographic panic.
The final piece of the auxiliary puzzle, which highlights their tactical adaptability, is a specific unit known as the Skiratai.
Where did the Skiratai fit into the battle line?
The Skiratai were an elite light infantry force drawn from Skiritis, a rugged, highly mountainous district on the northern border between Laconia and Arcadia.
Their harsh environment made them incredibly hardy, agile, and skilled at traversing difficult terrain that the heavy phalanx couldn't navigate. So they aren't lining up shoulder to shoulder in the slow-moving shield wall.
No, their tactics compensated for the rigid, slow-moving, heavy infantry focus of the main Spartan line.
They acted as the army's advanced scouts, nocturnal sentries, and ambushers.
In a pitched battle, their designated, highly trusted position was on the extreme left flank of the phalanx.
Why is the extreme left flank so critical?
Because of the way the aspis shield is held. Remember, the shield covers the left side of the body and extends to the right to cover the neighbor.
The man standing on the extreme right end of the line has his right side completely exposed.
But the man on the extreme left end of the line doesn't have a neighbor to his left to anchor the formation.
The left flank is structurally vulnerable.
The Sciritae used their agility, their speed, and their javelins to screen this weak point, breaking up enemy formations, attempting to flank the main Spartan line.
So we have this incredibly complex, diverse army machine, a core of elite Spartiates, supported by perioikoi craftsmen, helot skirmishers and baggage handlers, and Sciritae mountain rangers.
And for a long time, this diverse coalition works beautifully under Spartan command.
Let's look at the peak of their power, and then examine the silent internal crisis that led to their decline.
The zenith of Spartan military prestige spans roughly the 5th century BCE.
It includes the legendary, although ultimately doomed, defensive stand at Thermopylae in 480 BCE.
It includes the following year, 479 BCE, where Spartan forces, commanding the largest unified Greek army in history, led the coalition to a decisive victory over the Persians at the Battle of Plataea.
And it culminates in 404 BCE, when Spartan expeditionary forces, led by pragmatic commanders like Lysander, finally forced the starvation and surrender of Athens, winning the grueling, decades-long Peloponnesian War and establishing Sparta as the unquestioned dominant hegemon of the Greek world. They win the war, they possess the supreme military power, and they dictate the terms of peace across the Aegean.
But internally, the engine driving this empire is already failing.
Let's introduce the critical concept of oliganthropia.
Oliganthropia translates directly to a shortage of men.
It is the critical systemic vulnerability that brought down the Spartan system from the inside out.
If we look at the numbers, they tell a story of demographic collapse.
Around 500 BCE, at the height of their classical power, Sparta could field approximately 8,000 full Spartian hoplites.
By the end of the Peloponnesian War, a century later, that number had dropped to perhaps 2,500.
And by the 370s BCE, there were fewer than 1,000 full Spartiate citizens left to defend an empire.
A drop from 8,000 down to under 1,000.
You simply cannot garrison cities and sustain a sprawling empire with those numbers.
Was this rapid decline just the result of battlefield casualties? The Peloponnesian War lasted nearly 30 years and was incredibly bloody.
Battlefield casualties certainly accelerated the decline. An earthquake in 464 BCE also wiped out a significant portion of the population.
But the root cause of oliganthropia was not martial, it was economic, and it was tied directly to the rigid, uncompromising rules for Spartan citizenship.
We have to return to the syssitia, the communal mess halls we discussed earlier.
Right. Graduating the agoge at age 30 gets you voted into a mess hall, which secures your status as a full citizen.
Yes, but entry was not a permanent guarantee.
To maintain your membership in the session, and therefore maintain your legal status as a full Spartiate citizen, you were required to make a strict, unvarying monthly contribution of food from the harvests of your kleros.
You had to provide a specific amount of barley, wine, cheese, and figs to feed your brothers in arms.
If a Spartiate could not meet this monthly quota for any reason, he was immediately expelled from the session.
What happens to a Spartan who gets expelled?
He was stripped of his citizenship. He was downgraded to a disenfranchised class known as the hypomiones, the inferiors.
He could no longer fight in the elite Spartiate phalanx, he could no longer vote in the assembly, and his children were often barred from the agoge. If the agricultural labor is being done by helots, what caused so many Spartiates to default on their food payments and lose their citizenship?
The concentration of land wealth. Over time, the state-allotted kleroi, which were initially intended to be roughly equal in size, ceased to be equal.
Through earthquakes, uneven inheritances, and strategic marriages between wealthy families, massive tracts of land began to concentrate into the hands of a very small, wealthy elite.
Interestingly, this elite included many wealthy Spartan women who, unlike women in Athens, could legally inherit, own, and manage large agricultural estates.
As the land consolidates at the top of society, the men at the bottom lose out.
Exactly. As a few families amassed huge estates, poorer Spartiates found their modest plots subdivided among multiple sons.
Eventually, the individual plots became too small to generate the required monthly food contribution for this session.
A man might be a fierce warrior, fully trained in the agoge, but if his land yielded a poor harvest, he lost his citizenship and was removed from the army.
If you look at this logically from the perspective of state survival, it raises a glaring question for you to ponder.
If the Spartan government knew their army was shrinking rapidly because of these rigid citizenship laws and land consolidation, why didn't they just change the laws?
Why not lower the required food contribution or redistribute the land to ensure every trained soldier could qualify as a citizen?
It reveals the fatal trap of extreme aristocratic conservatism.
The elites who controlled the Spartan government, the kings, the ephors, the Gerousia, were the exact same wealthy landowners who were benefiting from the concentration of wealth and land.
To fix the demographic crisis of the army, they would have had to voluntarily redistribute their own vast estates to the poorer citizens or fundamentally lower the prestigious bar for enfranchisement.
They flatly refused.
They prioritized their own oligarchic exclusivity, their wealth, and their social superiority over the long-term demographic survival of the state.
So, because of their refusal to adapt, they march into the 4th century BCE with an army that looks imposing on paper, but is increasingly hollowed out.
They are heavily reliant on armed periokoi and reluctant allies, while the core of actual Spartiates is dangerously small.
Which brings us to the shattering of the Spartan myth, the Battle of Leuctra.
The year is 371 BCE. Sparta is attempting to enforce its hegemony in central Greece.
They march an army into the region of Boeotia to confront the rising, defiant power of the city-state of Thebes.
The Theban army is commanded by Epaminondas, a brilliantly innovative tactician who understands the psychological and demographic vulnerabilities of the Spartan machine.
To understand the tactical shockwave that occurred at Leuctra, we need to understand how Greek armies traditionally deployed on a battlefield.
In traditional, centuries-old hoplite warfare, there was an unwritten, highly ritualized rule of deployment.
An army always placed its best, most elite troops on the right wing of the phalanx.
For the Spartans at Leuctra, this meant King Cleombrotus I, and his contingent of the remaining full Spartiates held the right wing.
Because both opposing armies placed their best troops on their respective right wings and their weakest troops on the left, battles almost always turned into a clockwise rotating wheel.
Each strong right wing would easily crush the weaker opposing left wing, and the battle would be decided by which right wing could turn and flank the center fastest.
Epaminondas looks at this rigid, predictable rulebook and completely discards it.
He invents a maneuver known as the oblique order.
Epaminondas completely inverted the tactical paradigm. He knew he could not beat the heavily armored, highly disciplined Spartiates in a traditional, evenly matched, head-on shoving contest.
So he took his absolute best troops, including the elite professional unit known as the Sacred Band of Thebes, and he placed them on his left wing, directly opposite King Cleombrotus and the elite Spartiates.
He intentionally forces his best men to collide head-on with their best men. But the innovation wasn't just in the placement of the troops, it was the physical depth of the formation.
The traditional Spartan phalanx deployed at a depth of about 12 ranks. It was a wide, relatively shallow line designed to envelop the enemy.
Epaminondas took his Theban infantry on the left wing and massed them to a staggering, unprecedented depth of 50 ranks.
Meanwhile, he ordered his own weaker center and right wing to hold back, advancing slowly in a refused or oblique line.
He intentionally delayed their engagement, refusing to let his weak troops fight until his massive left wing had done its work.
When you have a column of men 50 ranks deep marching toward a line only 12 ranks deep, the physics of that collision must be terrifying.
When the formations clashed on that side of the field, it was a localized, overwhelming application of kinetic force.
The sheer forward pressure and momentum of 50 ranks of Theban heavy infantry slammed directly into the shallow 12 ranks of the Spartan right.
The superior individual training, the lifelong conditioning of the agoge, and the legendary discipline of the Spartiates simply could not overcome the basic mathematical physics of the impact.
The Spartan right wing was crushed, buckled under the immense weight, and rolled up.
And because of oliganthropia, the casualties were not just a tactical defeat, they were a national catastrophe.
King Cleombrotus I was killed in the brutal melee, fighting in the front ranks.
Of the approximately 700 full Spartiates present at the battle, roughly 400 were wiped out in the crush.
In a single afternoon, in the space of a few hours of combat, over half of Sparta's remaining citizen body was permanently destroyed.
You cannot recover from a 50% loss of your elite demographic core in a single day.
You cannot. The strategic consequences of Leuctra were immediate, and they were terminal for Spartan power.
Following the victory, Epaminondas did not just sign a treaty. He marched the Theban army straight into the Peloponnese.
They marched down into Laconia, devastated the countryside, and then they did the unthinkable. They crossed the Taygetus Mountains and liberated Messenia.
They freed the Helots who had been enslaved for centuries, and they helped them build a massive fortified capital city called Messene.
In one stroke, Epaminondas permanently stripped Sparta of half its territory and the vast majority of its agricultural labor force.
Without the Helots of Messenia working the fields, the Spartiates have no food to send to the Syssitia.
Without the Syssitia, there is no professional standing army.
The economic foundation that allowed the Spartan mirage to exist was violently kicked out from under them.
The Spartan military machine was permanently broken. Deprived of their captive labor force, they could never again afford to sustain a professional, full-time stand-in army.
They were rapidly relegated to the status of a second-rate regional power. By the Roman era, Sparta had essentially become a theme park of its former glory.
A tourist attraction where wealthy Roman foreigners would travel to watch the archaic, bloody rituals at the altar of Artemis Orthia.
It is an incredible, almost tragic historical arc. We have looked at a military force created by the very people it brutally enslaved, honed to unmatched tactical perfection through a psychological conditioning program that erased the individual, but ultimately destroyed by its own cultural inflexibility, its staggering economic inequality, and a demographic collapse its leaders refused to prevent.
It serves as a stark historical lesson on the fatal dangers of over-specialization and the arrogant refusal of an elite class to reform their institutions when the world around them changes.
And that leaves us with a final concept for you to mull over as we conclude.
The Spartan system was a perfectly closed loop.
It was highly optimized for one highly specific mode of heavy infantry combat and the domestic terroristic suppression of a captive workforce.
Consider how modern organizations, sprawling corporations, or even entire nations today might be falling into the exact same Spartan trap, becoming so specialized, so culturally rigid, and so entrenched in a past successful formula that they physically and psychologically cannot adapt when the terrain, the technology, or the rules of the game inevitably change around them.
Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.